Paul, not saying we're Nostradamus. Not saying that.
All right.
But I believe it was last week we said, hey, if there's going to be changes at Microsoft,
Ooh.
we're going to find out.
Oh, you're talking about the Snover.
I'm talking about the Snover. So for those who, before we dive in, aren't aware, Jeffrey Snover has announced that he is leaving the Microsoft July 1st, which is effectively, probably means he's actually leaving like the 30th because that's the end of the fiscal, whatever. He is leaving, and this is big. Like, Snover's been around since the bedrock was laid almost for Microsoft.
Yeah. No, this is, he's a missing piece of my programming Windows series. I've been meaning, I meant to, and will still, I'm going to fill in some gaps here and there. And one of them is PowerShell.
Mm-hmm.
And I, in researching this series, I had come across my first meeting with Jeffrey Snover, but I had heard about PowerShell, which was then called Monad. Years earlier, Mark Manassi and I were doing some kind of I think it was like a security road show, and we did a show at the campus at the what do they call it? The Enterprise Briefing Center, actually Executive Briefing Center or something. Mm-hmm. And I don't remember the name of the guy, but I have the notes from that meeting as well. And they were talking about, the point of, the .NET-ness of it and object-oriented and how they were going to do Unix shells one better, et cetera, et cetera. It was really interesting, but he's the latest in a kind of a growing list of long-term Microsoft.
I was going to say I don't want to say the old guard, but like the people who built a lot of the foundation.
Yeah, there's something to that. I mean, the number of guys who are left from like the late 1990s is dwindling. It's not just guys too. I mean, like Laura Butler had been there for a long time, and these are people who were, in many ways, like Microsoft fellows or technical fellows, or probably different terms. Who were just basically had accomplished so much that they were like, well, you make up your thing. I don't know.
Yeah, go do what you want.
Yeah. So anyway, every time a unicorn like this disappears, you have to sort of ponder, what's going on and what this means for the company. I mean, PowerShell, for example, is excellent. I mean, I don't think anyone would argue with that. Although I always kind of questioned whether typical rank and file system administrators could make this leap into what is sort of programming. Mm-hmm. And of course, in the years since, Microsoft has embraced Linux and, Linux/Unix, I guess Linux really, but open source. And, PowerShell came up out of an era where Microsoft was very much still focused on beating Unix/Linux, I think that was kind of the point, like just to look at all the weirdness of Unix command lines and scripting and make something that was object oriented and logical, et cetera, et cetera. So that's interesting. I mean, you can't say like it's the end of an era. That this is it's a vague time period, right? But we are in the midst of a transition for sure that we've been talking about for years, right?
The one thing I really like about Snover is right up until his very last day, this man holds a grudge. He talks if you look at his tweets, he even links to a video where he talks about when he was trying to build PowerShell, how Microsoft demoted him, put him in a corner and said, we don't know what the hell you're doing. Like, what is going on? He's like, this is a very bad 5 years. And he even says it in his tweet. He's like, in my 22 years here, 18 were great. Like this.
Yeah.
He doesn't want to let them forget.
Yeah, to me, I appreciate the transparency and kind of the refreshing honesty of that. There are people who kind of toiled behind the scenes. Like Gabe All was a guy who we had never heard of, and he came up when the Insider program started. September 30th, 2014 or whatever. It was the first time I think most people outside of Microsoft had ever heard of him, and then he became very prominent publicly for a while while he did that. But he had been at Microsoft for years, many years. It's interesting. This is an interesting period. The Don Boxes of the world have moved on to Meta and other things like that. All of this, it's awful. I mean, but in many ways, this is a dismantling of I would call it it's not really client, but we'll call it the client side. I think Microsoft would call it the on-premises side of the house. Yeah, we did a little webinar last week, and I might have said out loud, or I was thinking to myself, certainly. I mean, you can watch the progression with Windows Server where they introduced something called Server Core, which has a reduced number of workloads. And now Windows Server is the reduced number of workloads. The workloads are all up in the cloud in Azure. And if you want an on-prem Windows server, your capabilities are, and Microsoft will probably never technically get rid of it. I joked that, what did I say? I think it was like a federation, I think I said, or no, directory services would probably be like the last workload standing. Someone else suggested maybe it was certificate services or whatever, but we're going to be, it's, a couple of things. Federation services will always have to be part of it because of Azure, but it's just the world's changed.
Here's the other one, and I have no insider information about any of this. But the other one who, like, in my opinion, is like in that Snover class that hasn't said anything is Rasenovich.
Yep. Oh,
like,
for sure.
Like if he comes out and he's like, "Yeah, I'm leaving tomorrow too," like then you get a little nervous. But
I'd have to go. I don't. Snover in recent years has done something completely unrelated to PowerShell, and I actually can't remember off the top of my head.
He was working on Office 365 stuff, like backend
which
stuff
is
for a
weird,
while.
right? All right. So that seemed like strange to me. When Rasenovich left Windows, because of Sinofsky, by the way, and joined Azure, I, at that time, took that as a very deep loss and a very troubling sign of what was going on badly at Microsoft at the time, which was true, certainly in Windows. But you could make the argument that Rasenovich, like Microsoft, has transitioned to the cloud. And I would say I have a hard time following him now because he talks, he's a genius, right? I mean, he talks about things that I just don't understand, and at a very deep level. And but I feel like he's like a lot of the Windows Server guys, Jason Xander, and probably others. Guys drop off over time, right? I mean, this kind of naturally happens, but there are guys in the Azure org who were deeply involved with Windows/Windows Server core development back in the day, that are now involved with that in Azure. And I think those guys have a really obvious career track where it could make sense for them. I think it does for Rasenovich. Snover, I wonder if him moving around was due to the de-emphasis of Windows Server and PowerShell, and
maybe,
I don't know. I mean, I'd love to talk to him sometime about that. He's a great guy.
Oh, he's a super interesting person to talk to. He's a great public speaker too. He's got tons of stuff published, and
actually him and Rasenovich have a very public and purposeful rivalry about public speaking, which I find to be very humorous.
So you've got that. Oh, I got to find the tweet. I meant to pull this up prior to starting this because, Paul, I need son of a I need to read this to you. This is triumphant in the worst possible way.
Okay.
I'm going to read a tweet from you from the Windows Dev account.
Oh, you're just going to make me mad now.
Yeah, I'm going to make everybody mad.
All right.
Windows App SDK 1.1 introduced a suite of new features, including the ability to send Windows App Notification, aka Toast notifications, and push notifications to inform users when they are not currently using the app.
That's true.
Here's a reminder to open us.
This goes to the conversation I think we just had yesterday, right? About how, or recently, I don't remember, I'm sorry. But when Microsoft, we talked about it yesterday, because in Windows 8, they moved to this WinRT set of APIs, SDKs, whatever, programming model, app model. And Windows 10 continued that. We now call that UWP. Actually, we now call it the Windows App SDK, right? But it kind of went, it was Metro-style apps, store apps, universal apps with a small u, universal Windows platform apps, UWP, and now it's Windows App SDK. So Windows App SDK was supposed to ship at 1.1. Was supposed to ship at build, and they missed that date by about 2 weeks, I think. And yes, that is one of I think one of the other capabilities. If you think that's dumb, I believe,
and I do think it's dumb, but yeah.
But one of the other capabilities is it supports multiple windows in an app. I mean, this is kind of what I'm talking about. From a mobile app perspective, right? Some of the new capabilities we see in the Windows App SDK 1.0 or 1.1 are advances. I mean, multiple windows in an app sounds stupid. It's 2021 that we had this capability back in Windows, I guess 2.0 probably in 1988 or something. What are you talking about? But this is a mobile app platform, right? So these capabilities are actually, they make a little, whatever. They're trying to transition it to be more of a desktop thing. So they're adding these capabilities. But that's why I said in many ways, though, as from an app developer perspective, a desktop app developer perspective, this thing is horribly immature.
Yeah.
And yes, that's true. Notifications are bright.
Yeah,
I know. I know.
Yep.
So I'm gonna guess. I've never looked deeply into what that means, but this is my guess. Mobile apps often have services that run in the background, and you can put them to sleep. The app will go to sleep automatically. The OS does that, but the certain services, background services, can still run. The obvious examples, like a mail app, will be polling for new messages or can accept pushed emails or whatever it is. Okay, and they can do that in a very low power state. It's designed to be efficient. Blah blah blah. Whatever. This is something we accept on phones. Although the Apple Mail app is terrible at this, by the way. I use it with Gmail. I sometimes have to go into the app and manually refresh it, and it's like, oh, you have 7 new emails, But technically, that type of thing should work all the time. The App SDK, Windows App SDK, sort of brings those technologies to a desktop. I'm going to put quotes around that, but a desktop platform. So desktop apps also can, of course, can have background processes that could persist, and that's bad form. But I think this is bringing that more modern mobile app style notification system to what is technically a desktop app. So you could close it and still get those emails or whatever types of notifications. That's my. I'm just devil's advocating it. I don't know 100% for sure, but that is what it sounds like to me. I know it's ludicrous.
Yeah. Either way, even if that is let's be optimists and say you're absolutely right. It will totally be abused by people. Either way.
Yeah, well, of course, that's what developers do, and I don't mean that in like a snarky sense. I mean, of course,
right.
You have a capability, of course. I mean, that's why, not that it stopped, but I mean, until Windows 8, the only way that you could, as a developer, ensure that your app performed well or did the type of thing we just described was you launch a process at startup. It sits there in a tray, maybe has a little icon with stupid options on it. And, Apple used to infamously preload stuff. So if you installed iTunes, it would do like a preloader. Adobe did, and I think still does. A lot of companies will do a little, because they have their own updating system, they'll preload an updater that will check for updates, which is another great background process to think about. And you can go into your, today it's in Task Manager, but you go into that list of startup apps and processes, and you can say, no. And, your computer will boot up a little quicker, but maybe those individual apps won't perform as well or won't update or whatever. But so this is the new version of that. Hopefully it's more efficient, hopefully it doesn't consume more resources, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't know, drain sit there and drain RAM over time or whatever all the nonsense was that these things were doing in the past. Maybe. Look at me defending Microsoft on a Tuesday.
Feeling okay.